So for a while on my Discord server, I've had a channel called The Workshop where people can submit either TF2 balance ideas that they have or new weapons entirely. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to pick out a select few ideas that I think have the most potential and make them, basically. I want to take whatever stats and general idea are provided, tweak it a little bit so I think it would be a bit more balanced in the game, design it, give it a name, and, well, I don't have the modeling skill, but basically conceptualizing a weapon to its fullest. So anyway, I have a good 3 of them picked out. I think all 3 of these provide at least something interesting to the class that they don't have already. Let's get into them. Alright, so first up to bat, we have the All-Stars Cannon. This was submitted by QCubic, and it's supposed to be a scattergun replacement, presumably, that is a pneumatic rifle that fires projectiles, essentially. Now, I know that projectile weapons replacing shotguns is not something that's typically done well. Most people think of like the Bison or the Thompson when they think of something like that, and that's definitely something that I want to avoid, especially on something as critical as Scout's primary. However, I think that there can be some really good ways to integrate this. I think flare guns are the best example of something like that done right, and the stats that are provided here, I think, do this idea justice and would actually make this a weapon that's worth using. So the stats that QCubic provided, which I will be changing down the road, this is just for reference, essentially it fires an arcing projectile that you can charge up by holding down fire. You can like increase the damage and the projectile speed, or you can tap fire to get the weaker projectile. That's kind of the idea. The penalties are that it has a smaller clip size, which is what's leading me to believe this is a scattergun, because 83% would take away 5 out of 6 shells, which makes sense. And it also has a damage penalty, which I'm not really sure how that works. Like, damage penalty compared to what, I guess, is the better question. I'll be manually tuning the damage later, so I'm not too worried about this, but this kind of gives us a reference of what the weapon is supposed to be. Now, what's really nice is that QCubic actually provides a lot of the typically invisible data, like the various damages and projectile speeds at each level of charge, how long it takes to charge, and stuff like that. I believe 960 hammer units per second uncharged is the same as a uncharged sticky bomb launcher, and 2400 is the same as like a rescue ranger claw, so that kind of gives you a pretty good understanding of what those are supposed to be. It's supposed to do 67% extra damage at full charge, again, compared to what, I guess we'll have to decide on our own, but that's the scaling that he's intending it to be, and it has a charge time of 1.2 seconds. Overall, I think this would be a pretty interesting weapon as it is. There isn't a ton wrong with this that I can really point out, especially because we don't really know like some of the more intricate details like exact damage and whatnot, but something like this where you can like charge up a projectile as Scout to have, I guess, some better mid-range combat at the cost of having to lead projectiles is a pretty cool weapon idea. I think that would actually fit Scout's playstyle pretty well, and this could potentially be a high damage, high skill cap weapon. But of course, I want to balance this. I don't think it's absolutely perfect as it is. Honestly, with this one, there's not a ton that I would really change. I think the main thing is that I would remove the smaller clip size penalty entirely and replace that with something along the lines of like no reload necessary. It basically does the same thing. I just don't think that this should be a weapon that you have to shoot and then reload after every time. I think if you're going for something like this, being able to like spam low power shots at close range is almost a necessity, because otherwise Scout's just not going to have any damage at close range, which you obviously wouldn't necessarily want on a Scout weapon. I will note too, he said that the projectile is unaffected by ramp up or fall off. I'm inclined to keep that for now and see what the damages turn out to be, and if it's like too ridiculous, I mean, we can obviously fix it later. But honestly, I think you should be rewarded for hitting people at longer ranges. The typical 50% fall off is a lot, and again, this is a Scout primary. Like it's one of Scout's most powerful tools in his kit. Well, not one of it. It is the most powerful tool in Scout's kit. We have to give it at least some kind of damage for it to be good. What I will remove is the 10% damage penalty. Again, I'm gonna manually fine-tune the damage numbers anyway. The only reason I'm removing this is just to remove the clutter. The damages will be different than stock anyway, but that's kind of to be expected. I don't really think that's something you need to show on the weapon, so I'll take that out as it is. Now, of course, we get to the damage and projectile speeds. Okay, so the thing with projectile speed is that it's actually dependent on the projectile that it's firing. Not every projectile is going to travel the same speed and go the same distance with the same velocity inputs. Every projectile in Source Engine games has a mass value and also like different aerodynamics. Source is a pretty wacky engine, and you can really see this through stuff like CSGO's smoke setups. But with TF2, there is a little bit that still changes, and I think what I'm going to do with this is make it fire baseballs. I think baseballs are the most logical thing that Scout could shoot out of a pressurized cannon. So basically, we have to compare everything up against the Sandman ball now. Ideally, the maximum speed should just be the Sandman's maximum speed, and then the minimum speed, I think we can keep the minimum speed at like maybe 900, a little bit shorter than an uncharged sticky bomb. If you want to tap fire the minimum speed weapons, I think you should have to be really up close to someone. As for what we should do with the charge time, I think 1.2 seconds is the same as the quickie bomb. It looks like basically everything was just ripped straight from the quickie bomb launcher with some rounding. Which is pretty cool to consider because that gives us a decent frame of reference. 1.2 seconds is fine. The other thing we have to consider too, though, is the invisible attack interval. I'm guessing by default this would fire at the same rate as the scatter gun, so like you would fully charge a 1.2 second max power shot. You would have the like 0.625 delay of the, or 0.625 second delay of the scatter gun. Don't ask me why I know that. And then you'd be able to start charging another one. Ideally, we would need to add a firing speed bonus to this too, actually, because otherwise charging shots is going to take way too long to make this any serious contender to like the stock scattergun if you want to kill people quickly. So I'm going to give this, ideally I think you should be able to fire a fully charged shot once every 1.5 seconds, which would mean that we would need to give this, I believe, roughly a 50% firing speed increase, which does mean that you can fire 3 minimum power baseballs per second, which is something that you would need to consider. Actually, you know, I'm rethinking this a little bit. So tell you what, let's give this a 25% faster firing speed that makes it so you can fire 2 minimum power baseballs every second exactly. That would also mean that the max charge time would be about 1.7 seconds, and ideally I'd want that closer to about 1.5. Although, I mean, I guess it depends on how much damage we're making it do. So we'll come back to that. As far as what the damage value should be, ideally, I would like the baseballs just to do 50 damage uncharged and like 75 damage fully charged. I think that's a pretty good way to both allow this to be like viable at close range. If you can kill someone in 1.5 seconds, if you're right on top of them, that's still longer than 2 meat shots. So still a reasonable downside, and people have the chance to like dodge because they're projectiles. I don't know. Yeah, if it's 75 damage, that means you can kill a medic in 2 hits from pretty decent range if you can aim your shots in about 3.4 seconds, which I think is fair because, again, once the medic takes 1 hit, he has about 1.7 seconds to like adjust his positioning to dodge. So yeah, I think that's fine. We'll leave the max charge time at 1.2 seconds. We'll give the firing interval a little bit of an increase up to 0.5 seconds flat, and we'll make the uncharged damage 50 and the fully charged damage 75. And I think for now that's pretty good on the balancing, so let's go into the actual design of the weapon and what I ended up doing for it. So like I said at the beginning, I wanted to make this fire baseball, so the first thing that I immediately looked into was like the automatic pitching machines. I don't know if those technically fall within the time period of TF2 or whatever. I don't really care. The suppressed carbine, the guy included as like a stock image, is not within the TF2 time period, so I am beating him to the punch at least a little bit. But the more I looked at the pitching machines, the more I realized that it would be really, really awkward, because the other thing we have to consider is the fact that Scout actually has to hold this in his hand. We can't just make this like a massive freaking shoulder cannon minigun type of thing. This has to about fit the form factor of the actual scattergun. So because of that, I had to simplify the design a little bit. I figured no matter what we'd end up doing, the silhouette would be unique, so no big deal there. And what I ended up landing on, ironically out of all things, was the Nerf tennis ball launcher that you see in Walmart that you can like use to launch tennis balls for your dog to go get. I don't know, dude. These are a really weird thing, but these are about the shape that I was thinking. Something that would basically be a bottomless clip, maybe with some kind of like funnel or receiver rack or something. So that's what I based the main design off of. I wasn't wasn't super satisfied with it because I think it's just boring, to say the least, but I was having, like, I seriously spent probably a good, like, 20-30 minutes just scrolling through reference images trying to figure out something that would actually fit in the scout's hands. Most of the pitching machines are absolutely massive, and while I could do something with, like, 2 giant wheels, like how you typically see them, again, this has to be something that Scout can realistically hold and, like, feed baseballs into. It has to look like it would actually function, and the boring answer just happened to be the one that fit all the criteria that I was looking for, so unfortunate, but a decent base at the very least. So going on to my actual design decisions, originally I wanted this to be something with like a wider back area and a little bit of like a longer, thinner front area. Not exactly copying the form factor of the reference image, just giving this like some kind of cannon feel, I guess, was the thing that I was looking for. There are honestly probably so many better ways I could have taken this direction-wise, but I think just aiming for some kind of handheld launcher is what I wanted to even try to get close to. I decided to add like a handle on the front too. That was the other thing that I was looking at. Added some like front and back details, and then I had to like try to figure out how this would realistically function. So I added like a funnel on the top where it looked like the baseballs could go into. Maybe like if you were looking down in this, you could actually see the baseballs being like loaded and fired. Again, it's much like the scattergun. TF2 kind of has like an unrealistic sense of where ammo is kept and stored. So I wasn't like too paranoid about this, but a weapon should look like it actually functions and isn't just like a tube that things magically come out of. So that was the point of the funnel on the top. Then I added a compressed air tank with a little pipe going from it to the back. I was kind of struggling to make the pipe, I won't lie. And then what I thought would be really, really cool is a pressure gauge on the side where the reading like actually on the gauge model in-game would be equivalent to how much you've charged it, kind of like what the Dragon's Fury does. So I made that, realized you couldn't really see it, so I started designing like a flat view of the gauge just so you could get a view for what that's like. And eventually I ended up with the final silhouette. Not super satisfied with it, but something that at least looks kind of unique. Again, Scout holds his scattergun like a shotgun, so all you need for the back handle is just some sloped surface for him to grab. Don't ask how these are fired. Who knows? It's a mystery. Don't ask. All right. Oh, and I will note that, yes, I am doing this in a vector program. I'm doing this in Illustrator. Unlike the previous art displays that I've done in the past, which have all been Photoshop drawn by a mouse, since then I've gotten a little bit better with vector programs than hand drawing, so I decided to test that out, at least for the first design, to see how it would go. And I mean, overall, it was pretty good. Like as far as shapes and stuff went, I think it was a relative success. Shading, on the other hand, was a little bit different. I did add some fire out of the front, by the way, to make it like a little bit more thematic. I feel like Scout is definitely the add cool flames to make it go faster type of person. So, I mean, hey, in the TF2 universe, you already have the gloves of running urgently, so it's not too far out of the realm of logic. But yeah, from there, I tried to do a little bit of shading. I wasn't 100% satisfied with how it turned out. Gradients in Illustrator are just kind of annoying to deal with, and more often than not just make it look weird. But I was too far in. I was like, you know what, we might as well see this one through, and if this one doesn't look good, we can do something different on the next one. That's what art is, right? Experimenting, something like that. So this is the final design that I came up with the All-Star Cannon. The shading did not turn out as well as I would have liked it to. I probably could have done a lot more intricate stuff, but I really should have stuck with just a flat style. I don't know why I even bothered finishing this once I realized how it was turning out. Anyway, I wasn't really satisfied with the name All-Star Cannon either, so I started looking into some various name options, and the one that I came up with that I think would fit it the most is the Curveball. Because on top of this being something that shoots arcing projectiles, which curve, it's also very, very different than what you would expect with a Scout primary. I mean, obviously all the current Scout primaries are like, what, shotguns basically, and this is a cannon. So I wanted to choose something baseball related, but I thought this one would be funny because it like also emphasizes the fact that this just functions so much differently than the rest of Scout's primaries. I don't know. Overall, I think this was the weakest like design that I came up with, both in name and concept wise, but as far as something that could be in TF2, you know, I think it would actually work. I think something like this realistically wouldn't look too out of place. So as far as like the final balance and design and stuff for the curveball, it's all right. This isn't something that I think like absolutely needs to be in TF2 right now. I think it would definitely be more of a gimmick weapon, if anything, if not a little bit annoying to play against. Again, the challenge with this is that I want to take stats that other people have submitted and see like what I can do with them, and this isn't just like me creating my own weapons to add the TF2. This is more of a building on what someone's already established. So overall, I really liked the concept as something that's like creative and new, but I don't know how good this would function in TF2, realistically speaking. I would definitely use this occasionally if it was in the game, like no doubt. I think a baseball launcher is something that you can practice with. Aiming projectiles and stuff would be really fun, especially being able to like run up to people and just like spew out baseballs and destroy them in like a second and a half. I think that would be a lot of fun. But overall, as fun as this would be to use, I don't know if it's really necessary for the game, and it also takes a lot of liberties on defining what Scout's role is, so that's another downside, but turned out halfway decently. Again, if I would have gone back and done it again, I would have not done the shading on the model. I would have just added more detail to compensate for that. I think there's more detail that could have been added, but not horrible for the first one of these that I've done in a while. Weapon concept number 2 was by DRAGONFLAIR 2008. He uploaded this image with 4 different weapons on it, and while some of these aren't the best, I think the one on the bottom right, which is the flaming potion that says hot, was the most interesting one that caught my eye. His stats for this is it's basically like a Molotov. You throw it down, it creates a pool of fire on the ground for 5 seconds that I guess would deal damage to people that walk through it. It has a 10% faster meter charge compared to presumably the Mad Milk. I'm guessing not the Cleaver, otherwise that would that would make it a little bit insane. And then the penalties are a little bit confusing, honestly. The 10% slower holster speed, I guess, just makes it take like very slightly longer to switch to the next weapon after you throw it. I can't really think of what else it would be doing. And then there's this one which says fires hot. I'm guessing what this means is that like you deal damage to yourself with the pool. Maybe there's some weird mechanic where like, oh, while you're holding it, you lose health. I don't know. I've seen a lot of those too, but I'm going to interpret this as meaning you take damage from the fire that you throw. I think that's the most logical interpretation of it. So obviously the stats for this one are a little bit wacky. There isn't a ton of information. We were kind of spoiled with the last one, but I think for the most part, the concept of a scout secondary that's like more of an area denial tool is pretty interesting and would provide a pretty decent side grade to something like the Mad Milk. Maybe not as much of like a fight winner. The Mad Milk is pretty much a guaranteed win in any kind of organized setting, but something like this that allows you to deny people. The way that I'm going to balance this is, I guess, more of a meta change. I don't know if I should do this because I feel like the imagination of the person designing the weapon should be the limit, but unlike CSGO, TF2's branch of Source does not support like the Molotov fire mechanics. You could probably recreate this using like really janky fire particles and like trigger hurts and stuff, but okay, the reason that I'm changing this is less because of balance and more because of, like, problems implementing it. But I'm going to change the makes a pool of fire on the ground for 5 seconds into just a ignites everyone nearby when it explodes. I think that's a little bit more fair, too. I said I didn't strictly do it because of balance changes, but I think being able to, like, deny people a scout and, like, force everyone to catch on fire when they walk through is a little bit excessive. I think this should more so just be to, like, repel pushes and stuff by igniting everyone and forcing people to retreat for health. The 10% faster meter charge is an interesting idea, but because of how, I guess, less powerful we're making this, I think it should be at least a little bit more spammable. Because this is essentially between the Cleaver and the Mad Milk in terms of what it actually is, because it's a throwable that deals damage and like does damage over time and stuff like that, so pretty cool. But it's also like a splash damage type of thing, so I think having a cooldown that's between the two would make the most most sense. The Mad Milk has a cooldown of like 20 seconds and the Cleaver has a cooldown of 5, so I think we should make this have a cooldown of 12. And assuming that the Mad Milk is kind of the quote-unquote template for what the base cooldown speed is, that would mean that this needs a 40% faster meter charge to get to 12 seconds. I don't know if exactly that's how that works, but that's what I'm going to put on here, and as long as these aren't being like screenshot out of context, you get what I mean by this. I also think the slower holster speed is kind of unnecessary. I mean, it's 10%. You're not really losing anything with that necessarily, and again, because we're reducing the effectiveness of the actual like throwables, I think that's unnecessary, so we'll take that out. And the fire is hot thing, I'm actually going to leave that on there. I quite like that stat. I'm going to change the wording a little bit so you can actually tell what it's supposed to mean, but the fact that like you can throw this at the ground to light yourself on fire means that you have a pretty easy way to farm Uber for your medics without having to sacrifice your melee slot. It also means that you can't just run into a group of enemies and throw it at the floor. Like you have to keep a little bit of distance with this, which I think is a little bit fair. I don't think that you should be able to just throw this at the floor and get free area of effect without lighting yourself on fire as well. And I'm also going to make this have a base damage, like on impact of, we'll say, is 40 too much? I feel like 40 is a ton, especially because this is like a splash damage for the Cleaver. So we'll say 35 of anyone caught in the initial explosion. And I think keeping this having a same explosion radius as the Mad Milk is a pretty good... That's a pretty good template. I don't see the need to change that a ton. So these are the final stats for the pot. There isn't really a name for this yet, but we will give it one in due time, no worries. So the picture that DRAGONFLAIR included is a like flaming potion. And while I think fantasy stuff is really cool in small doses, I think if we're designing original weapons, we should at least try to keep them somewhat thematic at the very least. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a Molotov. I kind of spoiled it earlier by saying that, but no, I'm honestly surprised that we don't have a Molotov type weapon in TF2 yet. It just makes a lot of sense for like Scout of all people to have this. So after spending mere seconds looking at pictures of Molotovs, because it's really not hard to imagine what a glass wine bottle or something of the sort looks like, I decided what I was going to do is with the actual Molotov itself, I wanted to make it team colored. My original thought was, oh, we can just make the blue bottle blue and the red bottle red, like pretty easy, but then I thought that, you know what? TF2 rarely uses the quote-unquote alternative color schemes. Wouldn't it be really cool if the blue bottle was green and the red bottle was brown? It's still pretty similar colors to the actual team itself, but those are a lot closer to what you see in like actual alcoholic beverage bottles. So that was what I decided to go with. I made a little bottle shape just using really basic stuff. So after making the label, I decided that there should be some kind of logo on the label. So I went to the TF2 wiki. They have a pretty good list of like all of the in-game brands, which I thought was really, really cool. Probably a wiki page that people don't see a ton. Eventually, I found this one for Finest Hour Ale House. You know what? That works well, and the label looks like it fits on a wine bottle or something, so that's the one that I decided to slap on there. But that's not really something you can do in Illustrator if you want to make it all curvy-like, so I decided to just postpone that, and we'll design the actual bottle first. So, I mean, the rest of the bottle really wasn't hard to design. It was just a matter of, like, yeah, add some, like, transparent shapes to look like it's filled with liquid, model out the cap area a little bit more, and what I wanted to do just to make this a little bit more Scout themed, because I feel like a lot of his weapons are more wear and tear, is I wanted to add some like tape to the top of the bottleneck. Who knows, maybe this was like some bottle that was like found and taped back together. I don't know, I feel like it makes it a little bit more like in the style of what you typically get out of TF2 weapons like this. But that was what the white lines on the top are. The cloth was really hard. I'm a lot better at doing geometric stuff in Illustrator than I am like more natural looking stuff, so I decided to make the cloth just as basic as possible. I messed around with like various types of shapes, but ultimately I just decided on like a two-tone type of thing, and then I decided to like knock out some shapes to like make it look like a torn rag, and I think honestly everything ended up looking really, really good at the end. I wasn't exactly sure how this would turn out, especially considering that the first one that I did clearly showed I was a little bit rusty, but I think this one turned out pretty well. So this was the final like design of the bottle itself. I then took this into Photoshop, put the label down, and then did some like little warp effects to add it to the actual bottle. And there we go. We have a fully functional Molotov cocktail. Sometimes it takes me a really, really long time to think of like names for weapons. Like I have to scroll through like various dictionaries and other types of books that have words in them. This one, I kind of just thought of it randomly as I was designing it. The thing that I ended up naming it was the Peaceful Protest, because I thought it would be like on TF2's brand of humor to have a Molotov called that. It's also an alliteration. It works pretty well, and I think that it's one of the more solid names for weapons I've given so far. So cool stuff. So anyway, here's the Peaceful Protest in all of its glory. I quite like how this turned out. Honestly, as far as like whether or not I think something like this should be added to the game, I think it would be really cool if Scout had a more area of effect damage type of thing. You couldn't make it as spammable as the cleaver. I mean, the cleaver is kind of insane as it is. Just being able to throw a 5-second cooldown projectile is kind of nutty. But if you had something that was like more splash damage based, more so like thwarting pushes by reducing like healing the medics give via the flames, just forcing a lot of people who can't be immediately healed to like retreat for health. I think that's kind of the intent of this, as I understand it. Again, this veered a little bit more from the original intent of the weapon, which was to be area denial, but I think that's for the best. I think just an area denial tool for Scout would be a little bit too much in a lot of circumstances, but keeping the fire throwable like on theme, I think it worked out pretty well. Overall, probably my favorite from these set of weapons entirely, and something that I would not complain at all if they added to the game, and I think the design that I made fits TF2 style pretty well, so overall, this is one of those rare ones that's just ready to ship, in my opinion. Critique's always welcome, but I'm proud of this one at least. So the final weapon of this video was actually supposed to be a set of 2 different weapons, but I only ended up fixing one of them. They were both submitted by a gentleman named Abunchoftrash, his name not mine, but I'll show both concepts, and then I'll show you which one I actually ended up going with. These were the 2 original concepts. There was the Practitioner's Power-Up and the Physician's Fix. Both of these were intended to be throwables that replace the Medic's syringe gun that give like an area of effect buff to nearby teammates. And overall, I wasn't the most impressed by both of these as they are, but I think there's a really easy fix that you can do that would make these pretty interesting weapons as far as the TF2 like weapon meta goes for Medic. So the intent of the Practitioner's Power-Up is that it gives like an offensive buff to anyone you splash, and then the Physician's Fix is like a healing buff. The Physician's Fix as it is a worse crossbow, but I think the area of effect kind of balances that out. The Practitioner's Power-Up is basically not really even a worse Kritzkrieg, it's just like a supplementary thing. I would definitely be willing to come back to this at one point in the future, but as for now, I decided that the Physician's Fix would be the one that I go with, perhaps counterintuitively, because there's one change that I made while balancing that I think would make this, again, really interesting as far as medic weapons go. But the stats that he has as is are that you basically heal people based on distance every time you code a teammate, so if they're right beside you, you heal 50, and if they're longer distance away from you, you heal 100. You also damage enemies in a pretty similar way, anywhere between 25 and 40. And then it replaces the syringe gun. While that's not really a downside in the grand scheme of things, because it's kind of obvious that, yeah, when you equip this in your primary slot, that's what it does, I am glad that he listed that on there because it does provide important information. So while this is a little bit of a lackluster weapon on its own, being basically just a worse crossbow in most conceivable ways, there are 2 very easy fixes that I think would make this amazing. Number 1, you add the very important ability to heal yourself by splashing the ground, kind of similar to Ana's grenade in Overwatch, where you can like either use it to heal enemies, or not heal enemies, you can heal teammates, or you can heal yourself. You kind of have to choose. That type of mechanic would make this a very tactical weapon in Medic's kit, where you could use it for a variety of situations and would actually have a one-up on the crossbow. But then my second thought was, why make this compete with a crossbow at all? What if instead of making this a syringe gun replacement, we made this a bone saw replacement? The reason you very rarely see melees replaced with stuff like this in TF2 is because of how it handles running out of ammo. Typically what what happens is if you run out of ammo in your primary and secondary, you automatically default back to your melee. So the idea is that you have to have at least a single weapon on the class that doesn't take ammo in order for Source to not just break when you run out of it. Now, Medic and Spy already have a secondary that doesn't take ammo, which they can automatically fall back on, which means that they have the option to have melees on a cooldown, essentially. Spy does this pretty well with the Spycicle, where if you, like, it melts, then you just default to your Sapper. And when you don't have a knife, like, if you run out of ammo, you're completely defenseless. Like, that is something to actually consider in the balance of the weapon. I think by replacing Medic's Bonesaw with this, the choice you have to make becomes a lot more interesting, because instead of it just being, do I want, like, burst healing on one target or slightly worse area of effect healing, now it becomes, do I want self-defense at all? Or do I want to run 2 healing items, which, like, really gives a lot of healing to teammates, but it leaves myself almost completely defenseless if I'm running both? This would make the dynamic of medic weapons really cool. So I think something like this would actually be really nice to add to the game. So as far as other balancing stuff that I would do, I would probably like regulate the healing and the damage. I don't know if making it change based on distance is necessarily a good thing. I think that should be kept to the crossbow. I think that we should just make it a happy middle ground with the healing, just 75 flat anyone you heal, regardless of whether you direct hit, splash, snipe them, throw it at the floor, doesn't matter. 75 healing to the person that you've splashed. And then I think we should make the damage always do 40. It's on the higher end of what he listed, but if you're replacing like something that constantly does 65 damage for something that does 40 damage on a cooldown, I still think that's a pretty big loss. On top of that, I think it would be interesting if you made enemies bleed when you hit them, just for 4 seconds, nothing huge, but something to discourage them backing off, at least if they're on low health. Again, ideally what you would do is you would splash yourself with this as medic as you're running away, but like if you got into a scramble and needed to chuck this into like a group of enemies, I think the bleed damage would pester some people enough to retreat, which is kind of what you're looking for in something like this. You don't want something that kills people, you just want them to go away from you so you can retreat. The other thing that I came up with, which I think would have more niche use, but it would be a really cool way to kind of give this more out of combat utility, would be to immediately allow anyone you splash to get critical healing. Now, if you don't know how the critical healing system works in TF2, essentially if you heal someone who's not taken damage in the last 15 seconds, they receive 3 times the normal healing, which is really good. The idea then is that by splashing them with this, you ignore that cooldown, you immediately make them eligible to receive 3 times the normal healing, which would only matter if they're out of combat, because like if they're actively taking damage, then it's not going to matter if you splash them. But that's kind of the idea, is that you can get people back into the fight quicker. Instant 75 health and critical healing, which means you can restore the rest of their health quickly too. Kind of a good retreat ender, I guess. I don't know how to phrase that. And then, like any liquid, this could extinguish allies too. Once again, just a way to quickly get people back in the fight. I don't think that's unreasonable for a liquid. Also a good way to extinguish yourself. Again, literally every other liquid in the game does that. I don't know why this one wouldn't, which I think I actually forgot to put on the final version of the weapon. Whoops, but it should be obvious that it does that. Not going to grant any kind of cooldown reduction for doing that, because it's kind of what you're expected to do with it, versus like the Girardi or the Mad Milk, which you're going out of your way to do, but that is a supplementary function should you need it. Oh, speaking of cooldowns, this ideally would take about 10 seconds to recharge. 10 seconds, I think, hits the sweet spot of you actually have to make decisions of, do you heal yourself, deal damage to enemies, or splash teammates with it, which again is about what Ana's Overwatch grenade is too, but that's kind of the role that I wanted this to play. And I think if you replace the Bonesaw and don't give medic any up-close defenses when you have this would allow for a pretty interesting full support loadout. So anyway, the design that I decided to take with this, I think I wanted to try to stick closer to what was provided as possible. This was just a hue shifted Girardi with a medic logo slapped onto it, so I wasn't trying to make this like a fully rendered work of art here, but the idea was I wanted to make the bottle a little bit more in line with what you'd expect from something medicinal, so I wanted to make this like cough syrup, basically, I think is what I ended up landing on. I found some pretty interesting images of like old-fashioned medicine bottles like from the 1950s, and I think like throwing cough syrup on someone to heal them is a pretty on brand with TF2, so I thought that would be a funny direction to take the weapon, and ultimately that's what what it ended up going with. I found a couple reference images of like 1950s cough syrup bottles, which were mostly alcohol, but we don't talk about that. So as far as the final design went, I mean, it was pretty similar to the last one to start out. It was literally just me drawing a bottle shape, like nothing really complex or crazy about that. Same thing we found before. I actually did not intend for 2 throwable glass bottles to be in the same video. I just happened to see these on different days and add them to the when I make a video doing this list, I'll do these. So cool that people are up on their game with throwables. But anyway, yeah, I just made this pretty similar to the reference image that I had. Not too much deviation. I don't think there's too much deviation that needs to be made. Really just making like a bottle filled with liquid, smacking a label on the front. The thing about the label on this one, too, is I didn't want to do another logo thing. I just wanted this to be a little bit more generic, so I just recreated the medic class logo, or just, I don't know, whatever this is, the red cross even. So you get the point of what it does versus it being like something more fancy. So while I would love to talk more about the design process, I mean, I did the entire thing in like 20 minutes. It was not that hard of a creation. Simple but effective. I think everything turned out pretty well, other than some random alignment issues in Illustrator. Everything went pretty smoothly and was not overly difficult. The name that was included was the Physician's Fix, and I wasn't even opposed to this. And then I realized, like, you know what? If I'm going through the process of like recreating everything, I might as well give a new name to all of the weapons. So what I decided to do with this one was probably not the best name that I've ever done, but it was, I don't know, I guess fine. I was looking through like some old, like outdated disease names, which, speaking of which, there are a ton of very interesting ones of what they used to call like old diseases and stuff. But what I ended up doing was the surgical solution, because on top of this being a solution to the problem of someone being injured, it's also a mixture. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't really think of a good name for this one. If you have a better name, let me know in the comments. I feel like I always do this where I'm like, hey, there's a single weapon I really couldn't figure out a name for. Make one for me. But it's a pretty interesting way, I think, to kind of wrap everything back around to the community in the end, you know? So yeah, if you have a better name for this, let me know. Preferably something medicinal, but it really doesn't matter. As far as the surgical solution's viability in the game, something like this would be really, really cool. I think I said like the Molotov was the best weapon that I made. That's only in like design and stuff. I think as far as like raw stats, this one would be much more interesting. Forcing Medic to make a decision between, let's see, do I want a burst healing option in my primary and a standard melee, a burst healing option in my melee and a syringe gun, 2 burst healing options and no self-defense, or more self-defense and no burst healing. That would add a lot more like complex decision-making to Medic's loadout than I think what currently exists. While you could run both the crossbow and the solution to get like a ton of healing, you have to understand that, yeah, if you get jumped, there is no 195 crit Ubersol to save you. Like, you have a 40 damage jar on a pretty hefty cooldown that might make someone retreat, but overall isn't really going to do much. You can heal yourself for 75 health immediately if you want, but again, you only have one of those. You have to make sure that you're not wasting it. So I think something like this would be really, really good for the game, honestly. Again, forcing Medic to like make decisions that aren't just, oh, I'm going to run the crossbow and the Ubersaw again because those are the only good Medic weapons to run ever. This would mix things up for an otherwise stale class, and I think something like this would be really cool. So anyway, those are a couple attempts at fixing community-created weapons. I thought these turned out pretty well. In terms of like weapon design, again, I had some pretty interesting ideas within my Discord that some of them I just wasn't able to get to. These were just the 3 that stood out and were all like different slots and classes and stuff. I guess two of them were on Scout, but oh well. But yeah, if you have like your own weapon ideas and you want something like this done with it, send them in my Discord. The link is in the description. We have a channel called The Workshop if you want to submit your own stats, your own like ideas for like names or designs and stuff. I'll probably change them anyway, but it does give me a solid base to try to understand what you're going for. And also huge credit to Abunchoftrash, DRAGONFLAIR, and QCubic. Obviously, I could not have made this video without you. Thanks for submitting your weapon ideas ideas shamelessly to the public, no fear. Honestly, I respect anyone that's willing to share their weapon ideas in like TF2 circles specifically. You can go on Reddit and find a bunch of really bad ones. So if you have the courage to submit your own, like, again, I at least respect you for that. But anyway, I know people have been wanting to see the designing weapons series come back for a while, and I thought the most interesting way to do it, instead of just like randomly generating them and hoping for the best, is to like use the design ideas that people are actually coming up with and trying to share with me. Like, you know what? I'll pass these on to the general public if they're good enough. I'll fix them up for you. So let me know if you want to see more of this. Not something I typically do on this channel, and also I've even changed like the general format of how I've done stuff like since the last time, but overall, yeah, it's a kind of an experimental video. I don't know if people even still want to see it, so let me know if this is something that you want to see more of in the future. I say it a lot, but your feedback does mean a lot. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like. If you have your own weapon ideas that you want to potentially see made into a future video, send them in the Discord. The link is in the description, and for the low cost of half your brain cells, you can potentially even have fun in there. And most importantly, have a good one.